Hi, my name is Joel Benz. I'm really excited to be sharing this talk with you. It's a re-record. Unfortunately, at DEF CON 31, we had a little bit of an audio issue, but it's cool. I'm joining you from my home just outside of Washington, D.C., from the beautiful studio here, which is great. So we have some good audio, and I'm going to be sharing with you today a presentation called Being a Nerd That Talks Good. Up-leveling how we talk about misinformation to build community, trust, and awareness. This is something that I've got a lot of passion for. It's really going to be an exciting time, and I hope you stick with me. We're actually going to play a game towards the end. So I want to start out first by just acknowledging what we're here to talk about, misinformation. Recently, we had an incident where there was an AI-generated image of smoke rising from the Pentagon, spooked a lot of people, it rattled the markets. And everybody is like, oh gosh, this is the beginning of the end. But what I'd like to do is just take a little step back to another incident. And I want to introduce you to somebody here. This is Lord Thomas Cochrane, the 10th Earl of Dundonald. And in addition to having the teeniest, tiniest ankles I have ever seen in my life, he was a Scottish naval officer, a mercenary, a politician. He fought in the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. In 1814, a man in a uniform posing as Colonel Dubourg arrived at the Ship Inn in Dover, England, and he was bearing this news that Napoleon of France had been killed by the Bourbons and they were victorious. And so this gentleman ordered a telegraph to be sent to the Admiralty, continued towards London, stopping at each inn along the way, spreading the good news. At the same time, there were 3 French officers that were celebrating and they were drinking in London, proclaiming the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. Turned out this was actually a hoax. It turns out that he was leveraging a lot of rumor that was happening. There were some rumors circulating that Napoleon had died. And so he sort of capitalized on that. You could call this definitely a mis and disinformation campaign. And when the telegraphs reached London, the London Exchange actually had a big dip. Prices began to slide. And, I bring this up because this was a hoax, but it also affected the markets. And so what we're dealing with is not necessarily a new phenomenon. So the question we really need to ask ourselves is, what is the big deal? What is the big deal about misinformation, generative AI, AI generative information? It's not a new thing. It's not a technological problem. However, there are some specific elements that we need to address. And one is scale. So because of technology, we're able to see an acceleration of untrustworthy content. Also, we have the ability to reach more eyes and brains. So we can scale and we can reach. And then also the quality is nearly believable. And I say nearly believable because if you're aware and if you have an awareness of how the technology works, or, you just are more in tune with the media, you can sometimes snuff this stuff out. So it's nearly believable fake content. What I did was I asked ChatGPT, can we prompt our way out of this? If this is a generative problem, can we prompt our way out of misinformation? And this is what ChatGPT had to say. So blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, while prompting can be a useful tool to guide AI-generated responses, it's essential to approach AI-generated information critically and verify it through blah, 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 blah. So basically the answer is no. We can't battle this technological issue with technology only. It's a part of it. But what I want to talk about today is something that we can do as communicators, as practitioners, we can do as technical thinkers within our community to also speak outside our community. And so what I want to do first is address basically 3 issues. The first is, as practitioners, as techs, we go too deep too fast. We know this subject matter. We start spouting technologies. We're talking about which large language model and what tactic did they use. And oftentimes we find that we're speaking too technical too fast. And so then we tack them the other way. I've got to get people's attention. I've got to do something marketing. I've got to bring in marketers. And so we go to designers and we go to creatives and we try to do something to get attention. And the problem there is that creatives often focus on sparkle over substance. They want to make a good product. They want to get the attention, but it's not really undergirded by authentic stories. And it's not really capturing the hearts and the minds of the people that we're trying to reach. And what I like to propose is that the reason is we're both skipping messaging basics. And so what we're going to talk today is a little bit about some fundamentals, how we can build a messaging foundation for talking about misinformation, and how we as practitioners can get better at this. So you're probably asking yourself, who is this weirdo with the glasses? I want to introduce myself. My name is Joel Benj. I am a messaging and marketing consultant. My background is in theater, education, and video games. And then in the late 90s, I accidentally became an IT guy. So I did all this stuff. I went from help desk to systems engineering to networking to security operations, compliance and policy, and et cetera. And when I got to the federal government, somebody looked at me and they said, "Whoa, you're a nerd. You talk good. We're going to put you in front of people and make you a communications officer." So I kind of have a foot in both camps. I came from liberal arts and I came from philosophy, classical human nature. And then also, I keep myself relatively technical. I love the cybersecurity community. I love the security, the trust and safety community. Y'all are my people. And so what I'm here to do is help us all talk. But first, I want to open with a story. So when I was at the Department of Homeland Security, the gentleman who hired me there then ended up going to the White House and finishing his PhD and founding a cybersecurity company. And one day we're having lunch and he says, I'm having a real hard time explaining the product. I've got the PhD algorithm, it's working, I've got some development, I've got some seed money, but I'm having a really hard time explaining this to people. And I said, well, what is the product? And he said, well, it's a self-defending artificial intelligence multinodal network using the behavior of eusocial insects. And I'm like, can you simplify that for me? And he said, yes, eusocial insects, ants. And so what it basically was a network that would use a theory of nervousness to DDoS itself if it felt that it was being attacked. And so he was trying to sell this. I said, who's your audience? Who are you trying to sell this? And he said, I'm trying to sell this to risk officers, CEOs, and the board, not even technical people. And so I immediately identified the challenge was, again, he's going too deep, too fast. And so I came on board and life was great. It was fun. I thought we had some fantastic marketing. We were doing some great stuff. We went really, really deep on this ant metaphor. We were trying to show people, this is how ants work. So this is us at Black Hat, 2016. We spoke at South by Southwest, but we weren't able to break through. We were having a real challenge because, again, tacking back into our technical approach, first we had to explain to people how ants thought and how they behaved. And then we had to talk about the algorithm. And by the time we got to the technology, people, their eyes were glazed over. And so, we tried then dumbing it down. It's kind of like Waze for your digital risk management. And it wasn't until a breakthrough happened. This is my son, Liam, that something amazing happened. So my son is a really smart kid. This is him. He's probably like 6 years old. He's been playing chess since he was, 5 years old. And one day when he was about 8, he asked me, hey, Dad, what does your product do? So here I have been trying to explain a PhD level algorithm to other very smart people, executives, many of them with PhDs themselves. And I was confronted with an 8-year-old, a very smart, remarkable 8-year-old, but he was asking me, what's your product do? And so I'm not a fan of dumbing down. And I think as technical people, we tend to dumb down. And so what I did was I said, you know what? It works kind of like this. Oh, this is him all grown up. He wanted me to show that he's 13. So I said, look, it kind of works like this. And I grabbed some cards. I laid them out on the table and I began to show him how the algorithm worked, at least how I saw it in my head, how the graph worked, how the ants worked. And he and I eventually designed a card game to be used to explain how the PhD level algorithm worked. And what we found was it was a remarkable way of getting this technical subject out of our heads into our hands. And the more people we showed it to, we saw their eyes light up and they really started to get it. And it became very successful. We took it to Black Hat and RSA. And every time we pulled these cards out, people were like, this is very cool. We happened to ambush Kevin Mitnick, may he rest in peace, when he was speaking. And he was very gracious to give us a few moments of his time. We were like, look, we want to bug you. We want to pitch you something. And when we showed him the cards, his eyes lit up and he was like, you know what? I have never seen anybody try to explain technology this way because this is really great. And by the way, get out of my dressing room. How the hell did you get in here? But what we did was we learned a lot because we would put this in front of people. The technical people were like, this is not technically how that graph algorithm works. And the salespeople were like, you want to put cards in front of the risk officer at some of the biggest banks in the United States? And we said, yes. Now, an interesting thing happened. We learned through the cards that not everybody thought the same way. And not everybody was thinking about the algorithms the way we did. We were invited to speak at RSA. We did a sold out workshop. We went to ISC Squared. And to this day, the cards are still in use at Carnegie Mellon University. And so what I'm going to talk today is about how we do that as technical communicators. We're going to do that through some exercises. I'm going to introduce a novel model that I've developed, which is catching on. People are actually using it, and it's fantastic. And the first thing is really just, how do we avoid overwhelm? So the first thing we need to think about is what is in and what is out with our content, because oftentimes we're overwhelming our audience. I want you to think back to the movie The Matrix, the first one, the good one. It's a perennial favorite among cybersecurity people. It holds up really well, but there's one particular scene I want you to remember, right? So it's right down here. So it's early on in the movie where Cypher is sitting at the front of the Nebuchadnezzar, and he's got his command center up there, and there's all this there's all this code dribbling down. And Neo walks in and he says, "Hey, is that the Matrix? Do you always look at that encoded?" And Cypher says, "Yeah, well, you have to, because the interpreter program, there's just way too much data here. But you know what? I don't even see the code anymore." And so I want you to think about this from the perspective of a technician, a practitioner speaking to a layperson. Or maybe this is the chief information security officer, and he's looking at all the dashboards and the CFO walks in. So that's really where we are. We have these practitioners who know this stuff, and they don't even see the data anymore. They just have these biases. They just grok it. They just understand it. And what we have to understand is that is because we are steeped in, we live and we breathe this subject matter. There's another reason this happens. I heard this phrase the other day, and it said, we have a Neolithic brainstem, we have got the institutions of the Roman Empire, and we've got godlike technology. And sometimes we focus too much on the technology. What I want to do is I want to step all the way back into prehistory. So I want to do a little bit of an exercise with you here. Imagine I were to walk you into a ballroom, and I let you walk around. There's tables and there's chairs and there's napkins, and it's really pretty. And I let you hang out in there for like 30 minutes. Then we walk back out and I ask you two questions. The first is, how many chairs did you see? Now, you probably, no fair looking at the picture. You probably didn't pay attention because it wasn't really relevant information for your self-preservation and your survival. But if I ask you, how many exits were there? Probably could pick out, at least within a certain level of confidence, there were 2 or 3 exits. And the reason for this is because of the way our brains are wired, we are wired constantly, we're filtering out information. So we're always taking in, we're looking around, and your brain has a couple of self-preservation techniques to filter out what's very important and what's not. So you saw how many chairs, your brain probably registered how many chairs, but it dismissed that. However, you're always looking for that escape. We're always looking for food. We're always looking for escape. We're always looking for shelter, companionship. These are sort of like biological drivers that we have. The more you have to think about the information coming in, your brain starts to get taxed and you start to drop packets. And so even if you're talking with somebody who you're on a peer level with technologically, if you start overwhelming them with too much technical speak, too many things they have to hold in their head, they will start dropping packets. And so the most important thing we have to do is respect the caveman. We've got to understand that technical mental overwhelm is true, especially in our industry, and especially with the audience and the public that we're trying to reach. So it's been said that professional chess players can sometimes burn up to 5,000 calories just sitting and playing an intense game of chess. I don't know whether that's a true fact, but I certainly know that if I have to concentrate for too long on something, I'm going to lose interest. So this is why I advocate for respecting the caveman brain. The second thing I want to talk about is the message. What to include, what's in. And for this, we have to make some very specific decisions. And what I like to do is I like to fall back to my liberal arts classical background and talk about the different objectives for communication and how do we connect. So there's really only 3 reasons that someone would want to talk to you. They've got to like you, they've got to understand you, and they've got to believe you. So this is emotion, logic, and credibility. It's that heart, that head, and that gut. And if I had put a picture of an intestines on there, it would have been weird. So I used a hamburger. Now, this is not me. This is Aristotle. This is the concept behind Aristotle's arguments. So we're talking about pathos, logos, and ethos. We use emotion to get people's attention, to develop engagement. We use logic to develop a relationship and to learn. And we have to use credibility for trust and conversion. So again, someone has to like you, or they don't have to love you, but they at least have to like you. They have to be interested. Then they have to learn about you. And then you have to give them a reason to trust. And many people are stuck kind of in that middle. So this is the result of my research. This is my landing page. Please read my white paper and buy my SaaS product. I have no reason to love you. And you haven't really given me any reason to pay attention. And so the way we learn how to balance this out is using a model that I have developed, which is a prioritization model of messaging. And as I build this up, you're going to recognize this model. I'm basing this model off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you may have seen before. It basically establishes, very much like the caveman brain, we have to take care of our basic needs first: food, shelter. Then we have to work our way up to companionship. And then we have to work our way up to social issues and religion, and then self-actualization. So that's what Maslow advocated for. And not many people know this, but Maslow, there's a theory that he stole that from the Blackfoot Native American tribe. And I mention that as a public service every time I mention Maslow for two reasons. One, land back. And two, as a European dude, I stole it back for myself because that's what we do. So we start at the bottom of this pyramid with technical details. These are high density, low emotion messaging elements. Everybody in the tech world has seen tons of these. These are your white paper, your PhD level explanations. But if you're trying to make a persuasion to somebody, or you're trying to get somebody to pay attention to you, or listen to your threat brief, or buy your product, or listen to them about misinformation, you can't really do it on a technical level because, again, overwhelm, and it's kind of table stakes. The next thing we want to layer on top of that are things like proof points, metrics. How do we know? How do we prove this? And there's different types of proof points that I like to help people understand. There's metrics. There's intangibles, there are testimonials, there are third-party things. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then there are what I call mantras. And a mantra is not a tagline. So again, I come from the marketing world, and everybody is like, what's our tagline? And a mantra is so much more, and it's so much deeper than that. So mantra is actually what is part of your character or the culture of your community or your organization that you say all the time. There are those phrases or those select pieces of language that really communicate to someone else that I'm just like you, or you can understand me. And so those are mantras. On top of that, we have brand values, or just value statements. And so those are those propositions, which is like, this is an exchange. If we're going to work together or you're going to listen to me, these are the things that you're going to get out of our exchange. And so we have to be very clear to people what's in it for them. And then the last two are story. And that's like brand story. It is how we connect with the experience of our audience. How we show, again, I understand what you're going through. I've been there. And then the last one is a big idea. And the big idea is kind of like the capper. It is the umbrella concept, the umbrella piece of the message that everything stems from. And it sort of becomes that thread that threads through everything. The reason I break it out like this is because these are some of the questions that our receivers are asking themselves subconsciously when we're talking to them. They may not be aware of it, but earlier when I talked about when you build in that level of awareness around misinformation and how media works, you can start to ask these questions along that same framework to determine whether what you're listening to is trustworthy or not. So we're going to start at the top. What is this message trying to make me feel? How is it hooking me? What are the big emotions? Because again, the top of our pyramid are high emotion, low density concepts. So what is this trying to make me feel right off the bat? And then second, from the story, how is it trying to connect with my experience? Connecting with me using story. And then which of my values is this trying to hook into? So sometimes you have to separate yourself and you have to ask yourself, what are my preconceived notions and values about the information that I'm being given? And is this feeding into that? Is this challenging that? So that is where you talk about the values. And then what key phrases and triggers are being leveraged? So again, our mantras. I always hear X phrase from this personality, or I always read this in this type of communication. That will clue you into kind of like those mantras. And again, you have to then evaluate, Do they align with my experience? Where's the third-party proof or validation? And this is a very huge one because, again, there are various types of proof points in validation. And so there's a lot of people that throw a lot of numbers out there. Numbers can be deceiving. There's a lot of people that use qualitative stories. That can, again, that's hooking into emotions. So you want to look for third-party proof, validation across some various areas. And then the last thing is just the technicals, the details. Where are the bare facts? Do they line up with the story? When I really dig down into it, or maybe I'm given a communication that is all big, bombastic language, and it's keying into my values, and it's very triggering, and then there's no facts. There's nothing, there's no proof points, there's no technicals. That's a very large indicator that what you're getting is just garbage and trash. So what I want to do now is I want to get you guys engaged to learn how to do this and to play a game with me. So I mentioned in my experience with the startup that I had invented a card game to make communicating our product easier. And I've done the same as part of my consulting work. And so building on my experience with the startup and realizing that it was really successful to get your thoughts out of your head, get them onto the table, get people using their hands to think through some of these concepts, I designed another game. And so I'd like to introduce you to the MessageDeck. This is what we're going to play with here for the rest of our time. And I do have a way that you can log in and join us. So what it is a set of cards with prompts on them. And again, we're remembering we have our heart, our head, and our gut objective. And we're going to build out some basic messaging elements across this framework. And so what we do is we have to trick the smart people. And so what the cards are designed to do is designed to provide some prompts. So when somebody is saying, I don't really care about the marketing, I don't really care about the message, I just have this big technical idea, I'm saying, well, that's nice. What is something that you would change about your industry? And all of a sudden their eyes light up and they're like, oh, you know what? Blah, 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 blah. We have triggered an emotion in them. And so what we do is then we write it down. Or, what or for whom do you advocate? Well, do you know why I do this? I am in this because blah, 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 blah. And that shows a little bit of credibility. Again, it shows that empathy. It shows I know where you're coming from. And so the way the model works is we have a series of cards. There's about 280 in the system. We don't have to go through all of them. Today, we're just going to look through a couple. And what we do is we work our way down. This is another fantastic one. Here's a tension one. Story. Where do you feel the tension between your consumers and their stakeholders? So again, it's a logical discussion, but it's also that credibility. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to work through some of these cards. I've got a Google form for those of you playing from home. You can join the experiment right now if you scan the QR code or you go to the URL here, and you're going to go to a Google form and you're going to be able to join us. Because when we were in Las Vegas at DEF CON, what we did was we had cards laid out on the table and everybody was able to provide their input across a series of cards. But we're going to do this together. I'm not going to use the cards. I'm going to throw them up on the screen here. It's going to be a lot easier. So again, we're going to work our way top down through some of these steps. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what the different layers are in the framework. And then you're going to have an opportunity to provide your input. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a messaging model or a messaging framework, potentially for talking about misinformation. So the first thing is we want to talk about these big ideas. Again, we want to keep these big. These are the things that will create the umbrella or the theme for all of our communications. Because again, emotion, you've got to bring people in at a big idea. So I've got 3 cards that we're going to talk about. Again, flip over to that Google form. The first one is where I started with the cards, the industry. So think about what's something you would change about your industry. Is there something that you would want to shift? Is there a paradigm shift? And go into the form and just, you can pause the video, take a couple minutes and answer what's something you would change about the industry. And again, we're doing this in the perspective vis-a-vis through misinformation. So what is something we would change about the misinformation or the media environment? The next card is an opportunity. So this is logical. What's an opportunity you see that others don't? So when you're thinking about misinformation, what is something that most people don't really latch onto? Or maybe they have a thought about it, but you have an opportunity and you're able to present it to them with a logical argument. And then the last idea card we're going to look at is an idea for the advocate. What or whom do you advocate for? So again, I showed this. So again, these are those big ideas. These are the top of the stack. So take a couple minutes, go to the Google form and fill that in. And then next, we're going to switch over and talk about stories. So stories, again, this is how we're connecting with our audience's lives. What we want to do is we want to look at the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we hear in our community. And this is, again, how we show that I understand your lived experience. So our first story card is the unseen forces card. What forces do you see that others don't? They may be aware of them in their life, but when you start naming them and you start putting a descriptor to them and you start reflecting that back to them, they're going to become more aware of those in their own life. So one way you can do that, again, is unseen forces. The next card is tension. This is one of my favorite cards. Again, where do you feel the tension between your consumers and their stakeholders? So consumers here, we can talk about the general public. So we understand you, general consumer of media, have got a real challenge with your peers in understanding what's true and what's not. And you want to advocate for what's true. So here is how we, in the misinformation community, can make that easier for you. It's as an example. So again, it is a logical discussion, but it's also credibility because it's showing that you connect with them. And then the last story card is a pattern interrupt. So this is how can you disrupt an industry cliche or well-worn trope to surprise and stand out? This is kind of fun because what you're doing is you're turning something on its head. You're basically saying, hey, everybody is saying X and you think I think X, but it's actually Y. So one of the things is, I am a little anti-generative AI because as a writer, I don't think it puts out great content. However, I do think it's phenomenal for writing summaries and I do think it's great for contextualizing. So I am not anti-AI, but I am pro good AI or something like that. So that's a pattern interrupt. Our next level here is the value. So again, this is what's in it for them. What is the thing that they're getting out of this relationship? Our first card, how do you want your consumer to feel after working with you? So if someone's going to pay attention to you, someone's going to listen to your messaging, how do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel doubtful? Do you want them to feel scared? Or do you want them to feel optimistic? And so you can say, I've got a message of optimism for you about misinformation. It'll be okay if we just yada, yada, yada. And then the next one here is be needy. What's the biggest need you satisfy for your consumers? And then the next one is relief. So again, it's different. Pain relief is a little bit different than the needs. So it's like, what do they need? What do they not want? So what pain relief do you bring to your customers or to your consumer? So you need to understand what's true, and you don't want to be confused or scared or feel like you're leading your friends and family down a path of misinformation, for example. And then we're going to look at mantras. Very briefly, this is the last category. We're not going to get into proof points and technical details, but this is an opportunity for you to do some self-reflection, look at our community. Again, we're trying to develop a platform for us as practitioners within security and misinformation to talk about this. So take a look at how we talk amongst ourselves. So what phrase do you find yourself repeating often? Is there something that you're always saying? So one of my phrases is that complex should not be confusing. I also say I'm a nerd that talks good. Those are my mantras. And I often meet people who are like, yeah, I feel the exact same way. And it's because I articulate and put those words in action, and I use them very repeatedly. If you ever hang around with me, you'll hear me say that all the time. But it's just who I am. So again, what phrase do you find yourself repeating often? And then the opposite of that, what phrase do you hear from your customers or community often? We're looking at finding a unifying message between what we're saying and what they're saying so that we're speaking on the same language. But we can also do some research. There's also some ways to do this. One of those is the zeitgeist. So do a search for your industry or your category and look at what the most common words and phrases are in use on the first, maybe the second page of results. And this can be very powerful because these algorithms are doing contextual analysis and they are saying, when I'm given this phrase, these are the things that are most commonly associated with it. So you can start to discover some of that language that you can use to reach your audience by either looking for their community or looking for your subject matter and then bringing that back and then bouncing it against your own mantras to find out what's true and what's authentic. And then proof points, we're not going to go into this too deeply, but what a proof point are, there's several different kinds. One is like a hard metric. There is social proof. There are intangibles, but there's also studies and there's also third-party validation that has nothing to do with your case, but you're able to use that. So what I challenge you to do is look for whatever you're communicating on, many different types of proof points so that you can use them in combination. And then the last one here is the technical details. This is the stuff. This is the stuff that we're very close to. This is the stuff that we live and breathe every day. I don't think I need to challenge you to come up with those. But what I would mention is when we're working through something like the MessageDeck, you've got to think more about the technical questions your audience would have. So for example, what is open and what is closed in your solution? How does your solution improve user experience and satisfaction? A lot of technical people aren't thinking that way. Features, cost savings, decision-making, expert systems. So again, these are many different things that your audience is thinking about, and they may have those questions. And if you can come prepared with many of those in hand and ready to talk about, or you can get ahead of those objections, then that makes you a much better communicator for your technical solution. And then what do we do with all of this? So what we do with this exercise is we grab all of the input, we collect it. So again, this is a collective experience. And so what we're doing with the input that you're providing is I'm going to collate that together. And I'm going to show you what I did with the Mozilla Foundation several months ago. What we do in the workshops is typically if we're all together, we're throwing everything on cards because it makes it really easy to then do some clustering. So this is the cluster board that we did with the Mozilla Foundation. We again just did ideas, stories, values, and mantras. And we were looking for commonalities. So if you look in the upper left, we kind of have a cluster of sentiment around taking advantage of people and the most vulnerable. Or if you look down at the bottom of the blue column with the stories, we're talking about the experience of echo chambers or distance from the human touch or fragmentation. And so what you're able to do is take a lot of people's input, or even if it's just your own brain dump, you're able to make some separation and step back and look for those common themes and find them and cluster them together. And this works really great when you're working with a team on a communication because you're able to find alignment. Oftentimes when I'm working with a technical crew, I'll say, hey, 6 out of the 8 of you answered in this way. Have you ever used that in part of your marketing and messaging? And most of the time they say, we had no idea. And that's a bold nugget that you could pull out, polish, and use in your communications. And then you want to call. You have to make some decisions. Again, we don't want to overwhelm our audiences. We have to make decisions about what's in and what's out. And having everything out on the table will let you say, you know what? That message doesn't really resonate with everything else, or that's in conflict with this. But if you're just winging it or you're communicating just kind of on your own, oftentimes you miss that and you can confuse your audience. So again, we want to call and make decisions. And in the end, what we found out from the Mozilla Foundation, this is very interesting. We thought that we were going to walk into this very negative. Many people were at the beginning of the session, this is scary. Misinformation is very dangerous. And when we started prompting them with the cards, I did a qualitative assessment on the sentiment, and, a large majority of the sentiment was positive. 39 versus 18 of the inputs were very positive. And this is what that looked like. So this is a word cloud, some of the largest terms that were used. So we had, opportunity for good, opportunity for creativity. Yes, there was an opportunity for negative, some division, but this connection, this opportunity for creativity, this opportunity for good, we saw that as a way to counterbalance a lot of the negative, because again, people don't want to be brought down, and you don't want to talk to them about fear, uncertainty, and doubt all the time. It's great to get people's attention, to make them love you, to get their buy-in by talking about what's good in the world. And so what's next? Please, sir, I would like some more. I would encourage you and invite you to fill out that Google form. I'm going to be taking all of the input from DEF CON 31, which I am still working my way through. And I will add that to your input probably in another month or so. And then I'm going to publish a little bit of a report, which is going to have information more about how the model works, what we learned. We may use this again at the next DEF CON. I would love to see you there. And again, if you want to pick up a sample, a digital sample of the MessageDeck and use this yourself, maybe you don't want to use the Google form, you can download that at messagespecs.com/sample. Use the coupon code DEFCON31 and you'll get some more information on how the workshop works. But I really encourage you to use this in your communications, to learn some of these techniques and how we can be better communicators as technical practitioners. Because again, at the end of the day, we're all human. We all have some of the same biases and some of the same fallacies and, some of the same lizard brain in the back of our head, that caveman brain. And it's very beneficial when you just take a step back and you're able to look at how balancing your message is. You'll be surprised. I really look forward to hearing from you. You can email me, joel@messagespecs.com. I am on Mastodon at InfoSec Exchange. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Misinformation Village, DEF CON, for the opportunity to talk, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks.